On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, the Syrian civil war, 8 years on. Is there an end in sight? And in our series, Tech for Us, a neuroscientist in Hong Kong describes the keys to China's scientific prowess.
To push the frontiers of science and technology. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Monday to Friday on CGTN in Beijing. We begin today's program in war-torn Syria. The 8-year civil war has caused a massive humanitarian crisis and destroyed the country's economy. Now the government is accusing Western countries of causing even more suffering with an economic siege. Take a look.
The Syrian war has killed hundreds of thousands of people and driven around half of the population from their homes. Children have borne much of the cost. UNICEF says it verified over 1,100 child deaths from fighting last year, but it says the real number is probably much higher. This month marks the 8th anniversary of the protests and violence that escalated into the war that tore the nation apart. With Islamic State militants on the verge of losing their last stronghold, thousands of people have streamed out of the besieged enclave at Baghouz. Most have gone to Al-Hol camp in northeastern Syria, which is now hosting some 65,000 people. The United Nations says it's gravely concerned over the conditions there and fears for the health of its residents. In eastern Ghouta, retaken by government forces from militants last year, the recovery still faces a long road ahead. Many inhabitants have lost neighbors, friends, or relatives as the population scattered through years of conflict. Rubble still clogs many streets, and water and electricity supplies are only partial.
Suddenly everything changed. What happened changed everything. I do not wish that it happens again. There is no comparison. We did not know if we could stay alive or die. Everything was bad. We could die any minute.
The war has set Syria's economy back by an estimated 3 decades. The country is also gripped by a fuel crisis that has seen price hikes and long lines for cooking gas as the United States cuts off supplies to most of Syria. President Bashar al-Assad has accused the West of waging an economic war. But despite all the difficulties, the UN's Refugee Agency is predicting that 250,000 people will return home this year. Long lines are now the daily norm at Jordan's newly reopened Jaber border crossing as Syrian refugees pile up their belongings and head back.
For more on the Syrian war, we are joined in our Beijing studio by Zhou Rong, who is a senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Welcome, sir. Also joining us from different parts of the world in Damascus, Bassam Abu Abdullah, professor of international relations at Damascus University and former diplomat at the Syrian embassy in Turkey. Also joining us in Washington, we have Ivan Eland, the senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. Last but certainly not least, Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst, joining us from Moscow. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Go to you first, Professor Abdullah. You know the situation really well. That is the country where you were in. Tell me, war and peace, which part are we in now?
Thank you very much for having me in your program. First of all, I want to correct some terminology which the Western media and a lot of analysts in the world is talking about. First of all, in Syria there is no civil war. This is first, we should know. The second, the war in Syria is not against the Syrian state only. It's some kind of geopolitical war which is bigger than Syria itself. Because of that, we see that we are talking after 8 years of this war. Not because it's there are internal factors, but there are foreign factors which are affecting on this war. Okay. The third thing which is I should to talk that after 8 years, I think a lot of facts is now more clear for many people in the world, because the Western media played very negative role during 8 years about the situation in Syria, when they talked about a Syrian regime and dictatorship.
Professor Abdullah, I have to remind you, we have very limited time for every speaker in our discussion. Therefore, may I also beg you to use your limits of time? And my question is very direct, and please answer it if you can. Is it peace or war you are seeing still right now in Syria? A direct answer, please, sir.
Now we are a very sensitive period. Syria and its allies in front of two fronts only, in the Syrian Al Jazeera, which is the east of Euphrates, and Idlib. And I think that the United States is leading some kind of embargo, economic embargo, to effect with the Syrian state and its allies, and to get some political benefits from that.
Thank you, Professor. I still didn't get a very strict answer, but I will come back to you later if I can, because the other speakers also need to voice their opinions as well, just to be fair. May I go to you, Mr. Eland? The United States, the name has been repeatedly mentioned in the answer from Professor Abdullah. Your thought about peace or war, where stage is Syria in right now?
Well, I think there's probably going to be continuing conflict at a lower level. Certainly Assad has gotten the situation under much more control than they had by Russian and Iranian help. But I think that's been the problem. It's not just the West, and the West has been a problem, but I also think the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks have also meddled around in this conflict. And it is a civil war, because that's what's happening there. Parts of Syrian society don't agree with the Assad regime, which has a bad human rights record, but that's no sign that we should support, or the West should support, fundamentalists against a more secular regime. I don't like Assad, but he's better than the fundamentalists that the West was supporting. But I think the West has had actually limited involvement there.
Well, we use a lot of different names, brand names, the West, the fundamentalists, and also the so-called authoritarian regime. All these interpretations are up to interpretation, I have to say, these terminologies. Of course, you all have your different interpretations of what that means. So on that point, I would like to go to Mr. Sloboda, coming to us from Moscow. Now, Russia's name has been mentioned by your earlier speaker, right? By Mr. Eland, coming from the United States. Many believe the war lasted so long because it's a proxy war between the biggest powers in the world, Russia, for example, and the United States. What would you say, Mr. Sloboda? Peace or war is Syria in right now?
Yeah, of course, a good portion of Syria, some 1/3 of it, a little over that, is still occupied by Al-Qaeda. Literally Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as it's now rebranded, in Idlib, Turkish forces and their Islamist and jihadi proxies, and then Jarablus corridor, and the Trump regime's forces have some 2,000 illegally occupying U.S. forces east of the Euphrates, with tens of thousands of proxies, Kurdish and Arab tribes that they are illegally arming, training, and salarying, as they have since the beginning of this conflict. Of course, it is a geopolitical conflict, not just the U.S. and Russia, but Saudi Arabia and Iran and Turkey and Israel. There's a hard to find a regional power that's not involved. The idea that the U.S. is hardly involved is absolutely laughable. The U.S. has been instrumentally involved from the first days of this conflict. The Washington Post has reported how the Obama administration was waging a proxy war, illegally arming, training, and salarying sectarian Islamist and jihadi militants, literally allied and embedded with Al-Qaeda, for a tune of $1 billion
There are a lot of accusations I can see, gentlemen, flying around, even among the three earlier speakers. And now, Mr. Zhou, coming from China, China is a member of the P5, Permanent 5 of the Security Council of the United Nations. How do you see it? As a Chinese scholar, peace or war is Syria in right now?
Right now, Syria is going from war to the peace very soon. I think right now one of the scholars mentioned that is a low-level conflict, not like large-scale war, but a low-level conflict. But we need the peace negotiation, and each party need to settle down, except some terrorist group. So right now, Islamic State, as far as I'm concerned, I think is almost finished. So the major task for the future is reconstruction.
Well, before we talk about reconstruction, we'll have some time to deal with that issue. We still need to come back to some of the issues that you mentioned. Certainly, the other three gentlemen do not necessarily agree with one another. Now, whether the U.S. troops are likely going to withdraw from the territory, which is now called Syria, the country itself, that's the issue. Mr. Eland, your thought? 1,000 strong. There are news that they're going to withdraw, but people do not know for sure. Let's go to Mr. Eland first.
Well, yes, President Trump wants them out, I think, but the security bureaucracies don't. And the U.S. Involvement has been limited as to what it could have been. Obama didn't go full bore, and Trump wants to get out. Now, the bureaucracies in the United States, I think, are pushing on the other way. So I don't know if they're going to come out or not. It may be like they're pushing in Afghanistan to leave some special forces. I think the bureaucracy would like to see some forces left in Syria as well, and I think that's a bad idea. I think they should withdraw and get out of there. I don't think the U.S. should be involved at all.
If the U.S., like the bureaucracy mentioned by Mr. Eland, insists on putting still troops there, Mr. Sloboda, what's likely to be the reaction from Moscow? Will Moscow continue also to have its own influence as big as possible there?
Yeah, well, if the U.S., and we also have to consider the Turkish occupation forces in northern Syria, do not withdraw, I think we will settle down into this low-level conflict, better to call it a frozen conflict. The U.S. and its proxies, right now, they still maintain not only vital trade routes, but the majority of Syria's oil resources in the east of Syria. Reconstruction of the Syrian economy and physicality will be almost impossible without that. At the same time, the U.S. will face growing resentment, separation from its Turkish and Iraqi allies as it continues to back the Kurds, and it is likely to face an insurgency in East Syria, which will begin to take a toll. We've already seen several attacks on U.S. forces, bombing attacks on U.S. forces there. That will escalate, and I could expect to see that backed by both Turkey, Russia, Syria, Iran, and everyone else. U.S. soldiers are in for a world of hurt in East Syria.
Do you agree with that, Professor Abdullah, that once one party insists on stay there in certain scale, all the other parties are going to be there anyway? Professor Abdullah, is that the picture that you are likely to have in mind? Will that be the future of Syria, Professor?
I couldn't listen. The voice is very bad. I cannot listen very well.
Okay, let me ask you again.
Please?
If one party of those involved in the conflict from outside Syria stayed there, will the other parties also stay? And can Syria face a future of once again entangled conflict?
We should, first of all, we should differ between two camps. Russia and Iran they came to Syria by invitation of the legal Syrian government. While United States, nobody invited U.S. to come to Syria. They enforced themselves as occupators, because you know, either through the United Nations Charter, nobody invited the United States, so there is no cover from the United Nations, while the Russia and Iran is by invitation of the Syrian government. This is first. The second point, which is very important, that we are fighting really against terrorism, while the other campus is supported terrorism. Example, Turkey, thousands of terrorists came through Turkey, including Uyghurs who came from the northwest of China, came to Idlib. Now they are thousands of fighters. They came through Turkey and through the borders with Turkey. So now we are in front of two fronts who are supporting terrorism and who are fighting against terrorism, which including the Syrian government, Russia and Iran and Hezbollah.
Mr. Zhou,
so we are in front of a turning point that who supported terrorism now is collapsing. The picture is more clear for the whole world, and I think Russia is played important role and turning point in this war against terrorism, because they know that next point will be Iran, Russia, then you in China is as a target of the
coming from different sides in this debate. That certainly should be encouraged in terms of expressing of your views, but certainly at the same time we want to have other speakers. Mr. Zhou, from your perspective, you see, once again, it seems that all these gentlemen are indicating if one party stays, all the parties are going to stay, and that's going to be the situation. Mr. Zhou.
Yes. I really do not fully agree with some of the scholars' points. I think right now we should not say who is right, who is wrong. We should welcome United States to withdraw their troops from northeast Syria, though it is illegal for him to invade this area. And the other several parties, such as Iran, Turkey, and Syria government, and also Russia, can stay together to discuss something about ceasefire in Idlib and some other area, and also think about the future reconstruction, and not always talk something about the past.
Okay. That's very important, as you said. Let's take a look at what is that reality. The 8-year civil war, some dispute that phrase, as we earlier indicated by one of the speakers, but that is widely used in the world, has spawned a humanitarian crisis with refugees traveling far and wide, but mostly staying in the Middle East. If you look at the burden the Middle Eastern countries are shouldering right now, as of this month, Turkey hosts 3.6 million refugees. Tiny Lebanon is hosting nearly 1 million. Jordan, 670,000. While Iraq, which has only just ended their own war, hosts 253,000. Now, that's a lot for these neighboring countries to shoulder. Now, so I want to go to you now, Mr. Eland. Is there a solution? Can the economic embargo be lifted against Syria? Will these refugees be able to return home with a life, at least, guaranteed?
Well, as your intro piece pointed out, some of them are going back, but not most of them aren't. And I think it's because Syria has been devastated. So I'm not sure that you could pull off the sanctions, and I think that's a good idea. But I think you're also, you're dealing with the fact that it's going to take a long time to reconstruct the country, excuse me. And I think U.S. can certainly pull out its forces. I'm not sure the other powers are going to be leaving anytime soon. Russia, Iran, and Turkey, if the U.S. pulled out, might go in further to crush the Kurds. So I think, and then of course you pointed out the Israelis and the Saudis are also involved in the mess as well. So if the U.S. pulls out, the U.S. isn't the only game in town here.
All right, interesting. Mr. Sloboda, nobody trusts each other. That is the issue here. All the parties involved in the war in Syria. And now there is the issue about what the country, the government of Syrian administration right now they're going to do, but there's also the issue of what the other country is going to do. Without trust, will the situation remain what it is, as you early predicted? Is there a way out?
I think there should be.
Let me go to Mr. Sloboda first. I'll come back to you, Mr. Zhou. Thank you so much, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Sloboda.
Sure. Of course, there is an easy way out, and that's for the foreign countries that are not legally invited by the Syrian government to get their troops out of the country, so that the government and its allies can finish off, the 30 to 50,000 al-Qaeda fighters that are still entrenched in the largest collection of al-Qaeda in global history in Idlib. But that's not going to happen. The Trump regime, Trump himself is not in charge charge of his own regime's foreign and security policy. His own allies don't know whether he's pulling troops out, leaving 200, leaving 400, leaving 1,000. The tone out of that administration changes every day. I don't think Trump has the ability to overrule President John Bolton and his own deep state over this. So I think the war will only eventually escalate. The war in Idlib is going to be massive against an entrenched jihadi foe, and East
Mr.
Syria
Sloboda,
and driving Turkish troops out of
Russia.
the north.
You didn't say anything about Russia. You only accused the U.S. Maybe they're not going to put their acts together. But what about the Russia?
Yeah, that's because Russia is the legally. Russia is the legally.
President Assad.
Yeah. The Russian forces in Syria, as are the Iranian forces, legally invited under international law by the Syrian government. The only reason they came into Syria in the first place is because of the proxy war that the United States, its Saudi and Israeli, Turkish allies were waging to overthrow the country.
Russia
so to compare the two of them is absurd.
You're saying Russia is going to be there?
Of course, Russia is going to keep at least 2 military bases and so, at the invitation, as long as the Syrian government wants them there and maintains its base treaties. Yes, Russia's not going anywhere.
Right. Now, here's the issue, Mr. Zhou, that you see different sides all insist on where they were. And it's hard to see whether a peace will have a chance, even though we see the war is coming to a lower level conflict. But that could pick up at any time if things like this continue. On the other hand, the livelihood of the people is the most important thing. Whether it's about the refugees, or it's about the education for the children, or about the economy in that country.
I think the refugee should be on the priority. Refugee issues is really very hard to tackle with. Right now, there are not only refugees within Syria, but within Idlib, there's about 200,000, and in the neighboring country, about 5.6. So refugees should also be settled orderly. That is to say, somebody suggests that we should send a lot of teachers to Syria to help the children of the refugee. I suppose we should get two ways. One is to send a lot of volunteer teachers to go to the refugee in some neighboring country to educate them, and others try to build houses, let the refugee within Syria to lead a normal life. Then we can just send teachers to run a school or to do some other things.
Those are only one of those examples that the government and also Syria as a country needs to handle. But before we go, I want to have your final view, Mr. Professor Abdullah. Without giving, once again, your political interpretation of many of the issues we mentioned, but whether the Syrian government is having a serious plan of how to rebuild the country once the conflict is going to lower level. If you cannot hear me well, I'll say it again. Does the Syrian government have a plan about rebuilding the country, making people's lives more peaceful?
Still now we have, as I have told you, in a turning point. Now there are two cards in the hands of the United States and its allies. The first card is the card of jihadists in Idlib, which is in the hands of Turks, and I think Syria, Russia and Iran is working to assist a process. The other card is the ethnic card with the Kurds, where in the east of Syria. And now the United States is trying to enforce embargo and through economic sanctions. But anyway, I think we are in a turning point. I think the Syrian army with its allies will go to the east of Syria because there are a lot of resources of Syria there, the oil and other things, that we cannot leave these cards in the hands of the United States. At the same time, when the United States is talking about the Russian presence in Syria, the Americans forgetting that they have 35 American air bases in Iraq, which is near Syria.
All
so
right,
I think we are going to a political solution, But we are in front of a big changes in the world. The states is more convinced that there is no way in military, and we are going to that to 2021, where is the presidential election will be the turning point in the future of Syria.
Okay, 2021. That's the word that we hear from your answer. Thank you so much, the four of you, for joining us. Our discussion totally demonstrates how complicated the issue is and whether people's real livelihood is really on the minds of the politicians. Thank you so much. Once again, Bassam Abu Abdullah, Ivan Eland, Mark Slobodda, and Zhou Rong. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. In our series, Tech for Us, a neuroscientist in Hong Kong describes the keys to China's scientific progress. Come back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Chinese President Xi Jinping will start a 6-day European tour to Italy, Monaco, and France on Thursday. In his first overseas trip this year, China-Europe cooperation on science and technology is expected to top the agenda. For years, China has been investing heavily on exploring basic science and advancing applied science. What's the thinking behind China's science strategy, and how will it compete against the major players in the scientific field and also cooperate with many of them? Today, let's meet one insider, Nancy Ip, a Hong Kong neuroscientist and Vice President for Research and Development at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. As a scientist in one of the most fascinating fields, human brain, Professor Ip said that cooperation in science is necessary to improve human society. Take a look. How do you, as a scientist, see both the cooperation and particularly competition these days as a result of geopolitics when it comes to science and technology development?
The ultimate goals of science and technology development are to advance the societies, and it's for the betterment of humankind. And this actually requires international collaboration in order to achieve the goals. But on the other hand, healthy competition, I believe, not only among countries, but also in individual laboratories within a country, is very important, and in fact is essential in order for us to strive for excellence and continue to push the frontiers of science and technology. So I believe that collaboration and competition, they are like two sides of a coin, and they are both important in order for us to achieve the goals.
Healthy competition, of course, is always the best thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Particularly for the scientists, to gear yourself up in order to find a new frontier. However, geopolitics does play a role, and increasingly so, I'm afraid. U.S. and China, for example, uncertainty about the nature of relations for the future.
Sure.
So you are a member of Chinese Academy of Sciences, also a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Are you concerned whether in the future that you will still be able to fulfill all these roles, free spirit, as a scientist?
There are so many grand challenges that we face today. In my field, for example, aging population, how are we going to ensure that we have healthy aging? And in other fields like, climate change and also shortage of food, new energy, etc. I mean, these are grand challenges, and it really requires multidisciplinary efforts, not only within, one region, but also across regions.
But scientists like you work so hard in order to go the direction you just illustrated.
Right.
And yet you see the politics is dragging totally toward another direction. I mean, as a scientist, how do you see that?
Well, I think when we attend scientific conferences, when we give talks, we share with everyone our data, and we hope that by sharing our knowledge will inspire new ideas. It is really that collaborative spirit that we can continue to make new discoveries. And of course, in China, we also maybe should focus on the areas that we have a niche, and that would allow us to to make progress faster.
In this government work report, you see the Chinese premier made it very clear that China have grand goals, but it's not against anyone or toward any target.
Yes.
So it's being articulated in a very different way. During your interaction with scientists on the mainland, and also when you are doing your research, how do you see this, the way of communication vis-a-vis the goals of research?
And a good example, actually, I can give is the establishment of the state laboratories in Hong Kong and also branches of the Chinese National Engineering Research Centers in Hong Kong. So through these platforms, actually, the collaborations have been very productive. And now with the Greater Bay Area development, I believe that there will be even more opportunities. For Hong Kong, you know, we have certain areas that we internationally recognize.
Like what?
For example, in my field, I think
Neuroscience.
Neuroscience, yes. But Hong Kong also has certain limitations, right? We have world-class universities, we have strengths in basic research. We also have, you know, internationalization, right? We are well connected with the global scientific community. But yet, Hong Kong does not have too much of an industrial base. And for commercialization, we have our limitations. So this is exactly what mainland can offer. And so with the Greater Bay Area Development Plan, we aim to build this region into an innovation and technology hub. So I personally feel that Hong Kong can contribute a lot. And with this development, I think Hong Kong will see a lot of opportunities in order to better integrate into the national technology, innovation and technology plan.
The Greater Bay Area, Professor Yap, you mentioned several times, but it's a grand plan. There's no detail yet. So where are the details going to come, and whether the details are really going to benefit neuroscience research or the areas that you in Hong Kong could really develop in terms of science and technology? When is that going to come from?
Well, I think it has to come from the grassroots level. That's my own view, because there are certain policies that have been set and announced, and it is very much welcomed by the scientific community in Hong Kong. I mean, for example, funding crossing the border is already, you know, a great first step, so that we can collaborate with our mainland counterparts easier, right? So previously, we have to use, for example, HKUST platform in Shenzhen in order to apply for, you know, these grants. But now, with funding crossing the border to Hong Kong, we at HKUST can apply directly from our Clearwater Bay campus. So I see that as a wonderful opportunity. So previously, we were simply participating in certain projects, but now we can lead projects, and we can put together a team and then apply for the program grant. So yeah, these are great policies. I do agree. You know, how Hong Kong will play a role, and specifically how to do that will take some time. But it's in stages, right? First, you have certain policies that would facilitate us to collaborate. Then the scientists in Hong Kong will respond to that, and you know, they will put together these plans for deeper collaboration with scientists in the mainland. So I see a lot of excitement in the years to come.
Nancy, in her discussion with me, has discussed how important connectivity in the Greater Bay Area is for China's scientific research. Nowadays, new technology like AI, artificial intelligence, has opened new opportunities for scientific research. Yet, emerging technology brings about new moral dilemmas. She points to how the controversial case of gene-edited babies in China pushed scientific ethics to the forefront. How can we harness science to ensure that it serves the betterment of the mankind? That is an issue not only for scientists, but also for all of us. Are scientists very patient people?
Scientists are very patient people, yes. And it's a very important quality.
Everything that we are talking about these days, fascinated about, almost has something to do with neuroscience. The thread of this field that could really lead one giant after another great leap forward in this field? What exactly is it, that thread?
I think for us in the neuroscience research area, I mean, it evolves over time. For example, I myself, I was a molecular and cellular neurobiologist. Yes. So I use cells, I use animal models, but I have already evolved into, for example, studying human and linking it with AI in the future. Because advances in technology development actually allow us to do things that previously was not possible. So, and that is the excitement of being a scientist. You know, we don't just stick with the old technology. When there is technological advance, we see how it can apply to our own field.
Tell me about how it's been evolving. What kinds of blueprint are we really looking at in the, let's just say, short and the midterm?
A good example is in understanding neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. My research lab has been focusing on what are the underlying pathological mechanisms that contribute to the disease. And so we look at how brain cells communicate and what goes wrong under the disease condition. But now what we're thinking is that we can, for example, understand the genetic risk. Then we can identify the genetic risks that are associated with Alzheimer's disease in the Chinese population. So this is a new area that...
Is it going to be very different from the other populations?
Actually, our preliminary findings suggest that the genetic variants or the risk factors are quite different from the Caucasians.
Fascinating.
So, yeah. So in the public database, actually, a lot of the work was done with Caucasians, and there's a lack of information for Alzheimer's disease in the Chinese population. So a few years ago, you know, I started the data collection, and our preliminary findings suggest that the genetic variants prevalent in the Caucasian population actually are not so prevalent in the Chinese population. So our goal is to link the genetic data with the clinical endophenotypes and also the imaging data in order for us to have a more integrated idea about the risk factors, and that's where AI can come in and contribute.
Talking about neuroscience, I have to mention to you a case earlier. There was a scientist on the mainland trying to change the DNA, and of course that case was quite well known to avoid HIV/AIDS, but of course that was taking the risk of the other health factors of the individual, particularly when it's experimenting on humans. It led to huge criticism inside the mainland and also around the world against that, what the scientists did. As a neuroscientist, how do you see things like this?
For scientists as a whole, I think having integrity and having research, adhering to the research ethics is very important. I mean, this is an integral part of being a scientist, and so we need to follow and adhere to international standards.
I really respect the human beings.
And respect the human beings. I think we cannot ignore this, and I always teach my students
the bottom line.
The bottom line, I mean, of being a scientist, yes, you want to be the first to publish, you want to be the first to invent, but at the same time, you must have ethics. And credibility is very important. Absolutely. And, you know, we publish and shared our findings with the scientific community, and they believe our data.
Yes. You could see some media reports stretching the story, suggesting, see, the Chinese scientific circle does not have bottom line to begin with, and how can we trust them? Yeah. How do you see comments like that?
When the case actually broke open, it was at a genomic conference in Hong Kong.
Were you there?
Yes, I was there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a
shocking
moment for all of us, and I believe that we should not let one case destroy or impact on the credibility of the research done in China, and all of us have that responsibility to, you know, do well and to really gain our credibility. Yeah.
In the government work report delivered by the Chinese Premier, he talked about the predictable and the unpredictable challenges that China is facing or will be facing latter half of the year. To a scientist, what do you think is the biggest danger or biggest challenge under this context? And what can be done now in order to avoid it, or at least to be prepared for it?
Well, I think, again, for scientists, I don't believe there's any, differences in terms of the rules and regulations or guidance, that we can provide. I think science has no border, in my view, and there are challenges that it will continue to have challenges. But I think for us scientists, whether we in Hong Kong or in the mainland, I think we will do the best we can to overcome the challenges as they happen. But if we maintain our ethical standards, our credibility, and our continued, curiosity and our passion in science, I do think that we'll be able to overcome challenges that might come our way, one step at a time. I witnessed the rapid growth in science and technology in our country in the past decade, and it is so amazing. I mean, I believe that there's so much that can be done, and I feel proud as a scientist in Hong Kong. I was able to participate in the growth in science and technology and be part of it. And now, with the Greater Bay Area development, I really believe that we'll be able to complement each other's strengths. And it is a great opportunity for us to recruit talents globally. And I feel that our ability to recruit talents, our ability to retain them so that they choose to stay in the Greater Bay Area would be a strong testament to the success.
Nancy Yip, a neuroscientist, talking about the future. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and about the world. Good night.